Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. I am Tania Chairez, queer educator, organizer, and undocumented immigrant with the privilege of DACA. I'm the founder of Convivir, where I work with young people, young immigrants and refugees, and I'm here to highlight just the level of urgency. The moment is now. So I'm excited to share with you my autobiographical monologue developed in a Modus monologue workshop for the Modus Undocu America project, titled Listen to Your Heart. I often hear that the only way to get people to care about my struggles as an undocumented woman is to ask them to imagine me as their daughter or sister. But I have my own family, and my mere humanity deserves respect. I was taught at school in this country that my contributions to society are all that should matter. So I've done everything in my power to be at the top of my class, get into a good college, volunteer, work hard, pay taxes to prove that I'm worthy. And I am worthy, with or without all that effort, even though I often get treated quite literally like an alien or criminal, simply because I don't have an official document calling me a citizen. I also want you to know that I am proud of my Mexican identity, although it took almost 2 decades for me to embrace. From ages 5 to 18, I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, a place where an anti-immigrant sheriff named Joe Arpaio ruled. He put undocumented Mexican immigrants in chain gang shackles, making the men wear pink underwear to humiliate them. He literally celebrated spending less money on his inmates than on his dog. And this was somehow acceptable. I grew up constantly striving to prove that I wasn't dirty, lazy, criminal, or shameful, that I wasn't worth less than a dog. I now finally have a sense of my own value. So to feel my life under attack and have most people do nothing in response, it's as if my humanity doesn't matter. And that baffles me. It's inconceivable that the very ground under my feet is falling away and I could be deported, put into a detention center, separated from my family, my neighbors, lose my job, my mortgage, and all I've built. And yet somehow you, my friends, people at the coffee shop, the grocery store, maybe you listening to my story right now, don't see my situation as urgent enough to get up and do something about it. My entire community of documented and undocumented people is under attack everywhere, left and right, day after day. And it seems most people think they've done their job simply by liking my article on Facebook. Sad crying face, maybe even angry face. People think they've done enough by staying caught up on the news so they have something to lament at the dinner table. My life is not a talking point. My life is not something to uplift a liberal agenda. And don't you dare pity me or send me your prayers. Do something. Call your senator or your immigrant-phobic family. Show up at an immigrant rights meeting. Because every day of inaction is another day the status quo prevails. And the status quo is painful, even if I still have my family intact. Because it hurts, physically, emotionally, mentally, that most citizens don't care enough to give their time and effort to help me and their fellow human beings. Because while you're going about business as usual, trying to keep up with work deadlines, health goals, and reflecting on your next gratitude post, those of us on the front lines of anti-immigrant attacks are fighting against the limited hours in a day. Because there's never enough time to work our 60-hour-a-week jobs and then go to meeting after meeting, plan events, protests, fundraisers, and teach-ins, pouring our energy from what quickly becomes an empty cup. But somehow, at the same time, It's still the job of the undocumented community to educate citizens on how our life depends on your voice, your vote, your money, and your willingness to show up. It's not like we enjoy the fact that we need you, but we do. And I'm exhausted from pulling your weight and begging you to act like a citizen in a democracy. And because most people aren't pulling their weight, my mental health is suffering. I need rest too. But right now, I'm afraid that if I don't go to that extra meeting, if I don't share that petition, if I don't convince everyone that this is urgent, then more people will get deported, sometimes sent to their death, and another family will be torn apart. You see, it's urgent for us all the time. In some place, deep inside, you must know it's urgent too. You must. So please, just for a moment, pause, breathe. Can you hear my words? I am afraid. I am afraid that in the end, no matter how much I've fought for others, I won't be able to save my own family from deportation. Have you seen the pictures from our borders? Innocent families with young children and elders, tear gassed, whipped for seeking refuge. Do you know what is happening across our country? Hardworking immigrants, good parents just like mine, locked away like criminals in detention centers. Young children separated from their parents in these terrible tent camps are exposed to abuse and dying from dehydration and untreated infections. Do you see a war? Do you see at least a semblance to concentration camps? Can you feel your own heart telling you it is urgent? It is urgent. Justice requires we take action, a pathway to citizenship and support to families seeking refuge. Please listen to your heart, not just for me or for the undocumented community, but for your own humanity too. Please, it's urgent. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tania Chairez, for that really emotional and powerful speech. Joining us now is Marissa Molina, who is the Colorado State Director of Forward.us. Marissa, please join us and inspire us around immigration.
Thank you so much for having me, Cheryl. And thank you so much to all of you who are joining us virtually today. I am thrilled to have the opportunity to be in conversation with Representative Joe Neguse, who's been an incredible fighter for the immigrant community in Colorado since his first term in Congress. And I just want to say before I get to share a little bit more about him, a big thank you to Tania, who I've had the pleasure of knowing in our education circles. Both Tania and I have been our former teachers, and knowing the way in which Tania has set the stage for many advocates like me to follow in her footsteps, I feel super honored to have the opportunity to follow after Tania. I've had the opportunity of getting to know Representative Neguse in my work advocating for the rights of DACA recipients, undocumented people, and all immigrants in Colorado. In that time, I have learned that we share a love for the great state of Colorado, its people, and that we both deeply believe in the promise of the American dream. As a child of immigrants himself, Representative Neguse knows firsthand what is possible when we welcome refugees and immigrants with dignity. It is for those reasons that I, someone who grew up undocumented, is able to stand before you today. And it is one of the reasons why I'm in this fight for immigrant rights. I will never forget watching Representative Joe Neguse deliver a passionate speech in support of HR 6, the American Dream and Promise Act. I watched proudly, knowing that a member of Congress from my state was committed to fighting for people like me and millions of other immigrant families. And that commitment has never been more important. We have a once-in-a-decade opportunity to finally provide relief to millions of undocumented people who contribute every single day to making this country better and stronger and keeping millions of American families safe and together. After 4 years living under constant threat from the Trump administration, as we heard from Tania, we know exactly what is at stake. We know that DACA continues to be under threat in the courts and that thousands of young people continue to live in limbo and under fear that their lives and their families will be ripped away from them. And that is why I'm so excited to be in conversation with Representative Neguse to discuss how we can deliver on this promise for millions of immigrants in our country and those seeking refuge and safety at our southern border. Representative Neguse, thank you so much for joining me for this important conversation.
Well, thank you, Marissa. What an incredibly kind introduction. I very much appreciate it. And it's a pleasure and a privilege and an honor to be able to join you and to be able to join Netroots Nation again. I always enjoy being a part of Netroots Nation. And I must say, this year in particular, a special privilege to join the virtual stage, if you will, with someone as distinguished as Marissa, whose story has inspired so many people, not just in my state of Colorado, but really people across the country. And it has been wonderful to be able to work with you on one of the most consequential challenges that we face as a country, which is, of course, the desperate need for us to finally make immigration reform a reality. And very grateful for the opportunity to talk about that today.
Yeah, and so let's jump right in. Thank you, Representative Neguse. You know, members of Congress, including yourself, have committed to securing relief and robust protections for immigrants this year, including millions of those who continue to serve in essential frontline jobs in the recovery of the pandemic. So while we know that the first bird bath with the Senate parliamentarian has fallen short of our ideal policy goal, it is our understanding that Senate leadership is working on additional proposals. I know you sit on the Judiciary Committee, so can you tell us a little bit more about this path forward? And why is it important that protections for immigrants emerge as part of the budget reconciliation process?
Sure. Well, first, let me just say, taking a step back, I think it's important for us to recognize where we are and the steps necessary for us to ultimately get this across the finish line. As you know, and as you alluded to, Marissa, just a few weeks ago, the House Judiciary Committee, and a committee that I serve on, I serve as the vice chair of the Immigration Subcommittee, we marked up our portion of the president's Build Back Better bill, the reconciliation bill, which included immigration. And as you know, the portion of our bill that we marked up was transformational. It would ultimately mean, were it to be signed into law by President Biden, that 8 million individuals would be able to obtain lawful permanent resident status, that roughly 6.7 million essential workers, including more than 1 million Dreamers, 300,000 folks who are in the TPS and DED programs, and 750,000 individuals in non-immigrant status would have a pathway as well. Just incredibly meaningful steps that we have been working on, literally, as you know, Marissa, for decades. So the fact that that made it out of the Judiciary Committee and that there is a sufficient majority in the House, I believe, that is supportive of these principles is a huge deal. And I would be remiss if I didn't say a big thank you with a very heavy heart to every single person on today's call who for the last several years, in some cases decades, have been beating the drum, making clear that these changes needed to happen because it is because of your work and your activism and lifting your voice in support of the voiceless that we are where we are today. Now, as you mentioned, Marissa, without getting into the technical details regarding the bird rule and the bird bath and all that is involved with trying to get a bill through the United States Senate reconciliation process, which is fairly archaic and convoluted and complex, suffice to say, as you said, that there are big hurdles and that our first attempt to have this plan approved in effect or ruled in order by the parliamentarian did not go as we had hoped. And so My understanding is that there are a group of senators, chiefly among them Senator Durbin, who of course is the whip in the United States Senate and a champion for immigration reform and the chairman of the Judiciary Committee in the Senate, along with Senator, a number of different senators, I should say. I don't want to just select just one or two, but a number of different senators that are working with Senator Durbin on what has been described as an option B or plan B around trying to make the case that essentially the reforms that we're discussing today would have a significant budgetary impact, which of course they surely would, and that ultimately they should be ruled in order for the reconciliation process. Senator Padilla, I might add, again, not to identify specific senators, but he has been an incredible partner. We've worked with his office, of course, the newest senator from the state of California on this issue as well. And he, like me, has a very visceral connection to immigration. I, as you know, being the son of immigrants. And in any event, suffice to say that I think we are on a good path. I think that the parliamentarians' ruling with respect to the plan that ultimately passed out of the Judiciary Committee, I thought that ruling was just not a cogent ruling. It doesn't make sense to me how she could conclude or reach the conclusion that she did. But again, I think we've got to have faith that we're going to pull this off. And we're, at the end of the day, there are a number of us in the House that have made very clear that it is a top priority and that we have to get this done. If not now, when? So we intend to keep pushing.
Well, thank you, Representative Neguse. I think that incredible commitment, and I spoke about this earlier, is a commitment that I feel like binds your work and my work together, that we are committed to seeing relief for families, for our immigrant communities who have suffered for far too long without any real solution. So I appreciate that commitment that you continue to show in your leadership in those conversations. You know, at the same time that we're fighting for these protections for folks who have been in our country for many years, we are also, have for the last, couple of weeks been horrified by the racist violence perpetrated against Black Haitian immigrants at our southern border and the targeting overall of Black migrants more broadly. And I know you joined the Black Caucus in standing up and fighting against those actions that we all saw. Can you speak a little bit more about that letter and how, we can, as a country, continue to welcome people who are seeking safety with dignity, the same way that maybe your family and my family had the privilege to be welcomed?
Marissa, I've always believed that America is at its best when we are a beacon of hope and of liberty to folks across the globe, right? And when we are in a position to welcome those who are fleeing persecution and violence and unthinkable carnage and just incredibly dangerous circumstances. And as you said, my parents were refugees who came to this wonderful country 40 years ago, and we've been able to live the American dream by virtue of the freedoms and the opportunities that we have here in the United States that don't exist in a lot of places in the world. And so, of course, as you can imagine, as a son of Black immigrants to this country, to see what was happening on our southern border and the way in which Haitians who are, again, fleeing unimaginable anguish and violence and very troubling circumstances, obviously, in their native country, to see them treated in that way, I just think it clearly was not consistent with our values as Americans, nor consistent with what I think America is and must be. And so we, as you said, in the Black Caucus, a number of us on the executive committee led on a letter to the president and to Secretary Mayorkas to implore him to take the necessary steps to ensure that that type of treatment never happens again against any immigrant, right? And ultimately understanding that we have to do everything we can to preserve and secure folks' fundamental dignity. And clearly that was not the case. I also would just say, when we talk about DED and TPS programs, of course, you're well aware of these, and I'm sure many of our guests are today, or folks at Netroots Nation, but it's important to remember that those programs also extend and should extend to African countries. We, myself and Representative Omar, just led a letter to Secretary Mayorkas asking him to declare TPS status for Mauritania, for Cameroon, and for Ethiopia, each country, experiencing, again, very intense conflict that is displacing upwards of hundreds of thousands of people. So in my view, again, America is a rich melting pot, right? And we, even the panelists today, right, reflect kind of the rich diversity of our country. And when we think about immigration and the immigrants that make America what it is, they come from all over the world, including African countries and Central America, South America, Europe, Asia. And so it's important for us to recognize that holistically.
Yeah, and that's so important, Representative Neguse. As I tell people, like, I wouldn't be here today if the American dream wasn't still possible. And I really mean that, because I grew up undocumented in rural Colorado before DACA, before in-state tuition in the state of Colorado. And somehow, because some really wonderful people along the way, including my high school counselor and some folks at Fort Lewis College, like, they guided me, they believed in me, and they created a pathway for me. And that inspired in me the work that I do today, my work as a teacher, because I wanted to make sure that that American dream continues to live on. And I think it really is upon every single one of us. And I really hope that folks hear that from what we're talking about in this conversation, from what they heard from Tania, that it is within each one of us to keep that dream possible for people, that we continue to give access to those types of opportunities to more folks who are seeking a better life in our country. Representative Neguse, we have talked about this question before together. The relief we're seeking this year is incredibly important, and there's a lot at stake. But when we think about the big spectrum of what it means to fix our broken immigration system, this is only just a small part of that. And we really need to be able to get back at some point to be able to discuss, like, comprehensive immigration reform that really tackles our broken immigration system from all the different angles. What do you think it's going to take for us to get back to that place?
Well, the most frustrating part for me, Marissa, and I suspect that this is the case for many Americans, is that I don't know that the solutions are all that complicated, right? I mean, there was a time not that long ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, where there was general consensus about the principles that would undergird a comprehensive immigration reform bill in the United States Congress, right? And as you said, it didn't just include, of course, protections for dreamers and the pathway to citizenship that we are now fighting for, but also reforms to our asylum laws, right, and our refugee resettlement processes, reforms to the J1 and H1B and H2B programs, really all inclusive, right? It has been quite a while, literally almost 40 years since we have had comprehensive immigration reform at the federal level. And of course, the result is now a patchwork of regulatory steps that different administrations have taken that have created a system that is incredibly inefficient. And I think a system that does not honor, again, our commitment to being that beacon of hope and liberty, and ultimately the benefits that immigrants bring to our country. And so to me, it's not so much that we're in need of solutions or policy proposals, although those are always welcome. What we're really in need of is political will. And that's it. I mean, the reality is what has changed from 2006, when Senator Kennedy and Senator McCain worked on their immigration bill with President Bush, to 2013, when the Gang of Eight worked on their bill with President Obama. And again, whether folks like either of those bills or dislike those bills, the general contours, right, were very clear. What has changed from then to today is we now, unfortunately, have political figures that use immigration to demonize and dehumanize, and I think create a political issue in order to win elections. And that's fundamentally what has changed. The solutions have not changed. The policy prescriptions really have not changed. But unfortunately, absent political will, it's tough to see a pathway to getting it done. I'm certainly going to keep on fighting for it. It's why I asked to serve on the Judiciary Committee and the Immigration Subcommittee But I would be lying to you if I didn't say that the biggest impediment, the lack of political will on the part of our policymakers in Washington, is not still the biggest impediment, which I think it is.
Thank you for your honesty in that question. I think it is so important for us to hear that because it's a good reminder that we don't just need bold action from Congress. We need bold action from everyone who is joining us and who's part of Netroots Nation. We need to make sure that folks are engaged, that we continue to ask our representatives to deliver on these solutions because the time to do so is now. And Representative Neguse, thank you again so much for your leadership, for the work you continue to do to make sure that we are fighting tirelessly for our immigrant community because you and I both deeply believe, I think, even after the Senate parliamentarian ruling, that this is our year and that this is the year that we deliver a solution for millions of immigrant families who continue to wait. So thank you for your leadership. Thanks for being with us today. And I encourage everyone who had the opportunity to hear us today, to hear from Tania, to take bold action because this has to be our year. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was a real pleasure. And to everyone who's watching, I would say, if I have one piece of advice, it's to be more like Marissa. She, as some of you may know, I don't know that she disclosed this, but she serves on a board of directors, essentially, board of trustees for Metro State University. It's a position that I held, similar position when I was on the Board of Regents before I was in Congress. And the fact that she stepped up and has stepped up in so many ways to serve her community and her state, notwithstanding the incredible hurdles and obstacles that she faced, I think we can draw a lot of inspiration from that. And so I'm hopeful that others who are listening today will do the same and look for those opportunities to step up. And hopefully we'll see Marissa in Congress one day soon. So thanks everybody for having me. Appreciate it.